Hello, everybody. Oh, it's so different now that it's nighttime. Getting on nighttime, 5 o'clock, the sun is already down. Winter, first day that it snowed last night, and it's now mostly melted off. But fortunately, the Cascades and the Olympics have nice amount of snow on them, something we always want to see here in the Pacific Northwest US. I'm Judith Kate Friedman. I am, among many things, a singer, songwriter, poet, writer, jammer, improviser, steward of the Myth Singer Legacy Project, which is dedicated in Daniel Deardorff's memory and with his work to carry forward the mission of restoring the wisdom of myth to culture and community. And I'm also the founder and director of Songwriting Works Educational Foundation, which is a charitable nonprofit organization dedicated to restoring joy, hope, vitality, and community through the power of story and song. And those things have all meshed, and the Myth Singer Legacy Project is now a project under the umbrella and the fiscal sponsorship of Songwriting Works. People are popping in and out, so if you have just popped in, please feel free to introduce yourself on the chat. We'd love to know where you're coming from and that you're here. And I am going to be reading in celebration of the publication today of The Other Within, The Genius of Deformity in Myth, Culture, and Psyche by Daniel Deardorff. So Daniel, as many of you may or may not know, was my beloved for the last many years of his life and the last many years of mine. We met in 2003 on Orcas Island at the Great Mother and the New Father Conference that Robert Bly, the poet and great cultural organizer, put together. And it took us a few years before our dear friendship in the arts became romantic. And from that point on, we did a lot of different kinds of collaborating, and it was a very natural thing for Daniel to turn to all of us at the last hours of his life and say, keep the song going. And when asked what song was that, he said, the song I'm in. So we are here to keep the song going. And in the Myth Singers tradition, which is a bard and a maker of ritual and a carrier of mythic ancient stories, which is what Daniel really dedicated the last third of his life to. Those things are the myth singing tradition. And in his legacy, I now continue to carry forward. So this book has been expanded in a third edition and is newly out today. Woohoo! Yeah! So we are celebrating. This is our fourth of 4 live streams with tastes from the book. And we have an upcoming event on November 12th, this coming Saturday at 7 p.m. Pacific on Zoom, where more stories from the book, some archival video and audio of Danny telling stories, calling fire, singing about the carrying of stories and the carrying of fire, and myself and the wonderful author and good friend, Juanita Roberson from Cincinnati. She's the author of The Inner Ground Railroad. We'll be looking at all kinds of intersections of otherness, cultural, racial, physiognomic in the body, all different ways that we are different in our backgrounds, in our lineage, in our experience, in our generations, etc. And in our flavor of everything, including maybe political even, and spiritual. Oh, the camera didn't know what to do with that. Because here it is on election day. If you haven't yet voted, please go out and do so if the polls are still open where you are listening from. And I have picked a reading that I hope will be encouraging for all of us in these times, no matter where we find ourselves standing, no matter who we find ourselves standing with. I want to thank Audrey DeMola, who's been here with me all day. She's working also with me at the Myth Singer Legacy Project, coming in from Long Island, New York, and Lenape land. And I'm coming to you from the opposite corner of the northern United States, right below Vancouver Island, Canada, in Port Townsend, Washington, from Mossy Rock, from the home that Daniel built. And this is originally was a village called Katai of the Sklallam people, and also the Chimacum lived here, and the Coast Salish of many different communities gathered here for years, or probably millennia. And sometimes we still have gatherings, and the canoe paddle will come through and so on. And that's always a great reminder, I think, to all of the rest of us that we really are settlers. We're privileged to be in this land. And let's talk about trickster wisdom, something that exists in almost every culture in different ways. Earlier today, we talked about authenticity and authority, the difference between verticality and the world tree, awareness of the great below and the great above, and mythologically in the Norse myths, I don't know why the camera's doing that today, but whatever, it must be the light. The mythic squirrel Ratatoskr, drill tooth, running up and down the tree, the trunk of the tree, of the world tree, the axis mundi, and how that verticality connects all things. And we are in the middle of the mix of the great below and the great above. And Daniel speaks in other parts of the book than what I'm about to read about the flattening out of that tree, about the severance from our roots, about losing our authenticity and having everything become commodity culture or sameness in civilization or conformity, etc. And so we're really looking at deforming images. The genius of deformity is not only a physical or another kind of deformity or aberrance or difference or divergence, but it is also greatly about form itself. And as Gaston Bachelard, the French philosopher, taught, when form can be broken open or an object can be turned on its head and we look at it differently, we are liberating our imagination. There's a great deal of freedom there. And that's really at the essence of this book. It's really, how can myth lead us back to ourselves, to healing, to each other, to the earth, the storehouse from which the stories are said to have come? And how can we, as individuals, intrapersonally, as he will say, and with each other interpersonally, how can we use myth to effect context, recontextualization, understanding, deepening, and also a journey from brokenness to wholeness, but also back to brokenness to embrace the fact that we are all broken in a whole lot of different ways. And so is our culture, our society. And that's going to be true. We are the both and. We are whole and broken, broken and whole. And with that in mind, we turn to the characters of Trickster to teach us a little bit about that both and, the holding of paradox. So this is from a chapter called The Lyre, L-Y-R-E, as in harp, where the callus meets the string. And I just want to check, are you hearing me okay? I'm a little further away from the mic. Okay, there we go. If you're following along in this edition, which by the way is available at innertraditions.com or your favorite bookseller today, the page is 135. The Lyre, L-Y-R-E, where the callus meets the string. Deardorff writes, the first act of the trickster Hermes, mythology from Greek mythology, the first act of the trickster Hermes, using the shell of a tortoise accidentally stumbled over at the threshold of his cave, is to create the world's first lyre, a little strung harp. At the mouth of the cave, where the inner world and the outer world meet, there, in the synesthesia of liminality, at the spatio-temporal limit, the unforeseen presents itself, and the mythopoeic, or myth-making imagination, is born. Rootedness, presence, and blossoming, each seeking the departure of the axis in its own style, weaving the many tonalities in which these energies sing. One may devise a resonant and expressive instrument. Once we strike the lines of association across the nexus of trifurcated spheres, below, above, middle, connecting above to below in cosmos, society, psyche, and body, then a harp of many tensions is strung. We have at last acquired the means of primal expressivity, the golden harp of the mythopoeic or myth-making imagination, upon which the unbounded phenomena of creation may come to play. So I just want to pause there and invite you, if you've just joined us, to say hello in the chat and let us know where you're coming in from. We've had people from all over the world join us today, from Spain, from Slovenia, from all across the US, from the UK, and other places unknown. So here we are. We've come out of the cave with Hermes. We've turned a tortoise shell into a little harp. We're listening to the unbounded phenomena of creation coming to play. It can now be stated, Deardorff writes, that the recapitulation of this dramatic gesture, this making, creating the primary instrument of expressive display, discipline, and praxis, which is a gestural word. It's like when you would, as a kid, immunize each other by one person putting their finger into this, and so they can't be it in a game of tag. That's what that word means. Creating the primary instrument of expressive display, discipline, and praxis is the first and essential act, the correct mistake. Keep that in mind. The correct mistake of trickster wisdom, because trickster is one who always makes a correct mistake. A correct mistake of trickster wisdom and the leaping consciousness. For it is by means of this music that the other within negotiates a hermetic, related to Hermes, sanctuary within the disconfirming world of Apollonian, related to the god Apollo, order. Hermes being the wild energy, Apollo being the established energy in the pantheon. Lewis Hyde writes, as Deardorff quotes here, Hermes makes a kind of peace with Apollo. Taking out his lyre and playing a beautiful melody, he begins to soften that stern, far-shooting archer, and before long, bright Apollo laughs for joy as the sweet throb of that marvelous instrument stole into his heart, and a gentle longing seized his soul. Hermes sings Apollo a theogony, the story of the gods, how each came to be and how each came to have what is now theirs. I suspect we are meant to imagine this as a theogony of Hermes' own design, Hyde writes, reshaping of old stories. In addition, I suspect that this new Hermetic theogony includes both Hermes and Apollo in its cast, and as such amounts to a simultaneous self-promotion and flattery. At the end, Apollo is helplessly enchanted, whereupon Hermes gives him the lyre. In return, Apollo placed his shining whip in Hermes' hand, ordaining him the keeper of the herds. Hermes is then admitted to the pantheon of the Greek gods. He is an acknowledged son of Zeus. Through all of this, the gifting, the making, the mistake, the picking up a tortoise shell, the turning it into something else, an instrument of expression. Deardorff writes, in this story, Hyde reveals the revolutionary intelligence, the mythopoeic, myth-making genius, and graceful cunning, which can persuade the gods to adopt Hermes, to tolerate his transgressions, and confirm upon him a new and unparalleled status. Keeper of the herds, a god. Deardorff again. The songs of the leaping consciousness bring the cultural vitality of the shadowy lunar edge, Hermes, Coyote, Enkidu, as a gift to the luminous solar center, Apollo, Bear, Gilgamesh. These associative tensions are not linear, but harmonic, and must be understood in the final analysis as neither this nor that, but something wholly other. The friction between the kinetic auritic forest and the cognitive normative village produces the harmonic overtones of association, thus expanding duality to triality. The third thing, which is no thing, the invisible, impossible, unthinkable leap, the overtone, the interval, the crossroads, the seat of the soul, the mandorla, the abyss. In this dance, my position is that I have no position. And yet, there's this oscillation. I'll read just a little bit more. He talks about the trickster within society, saying, in a society, there may be this larger and more insidious truth that is masked by the puerile depiction of a pearl or a rose, allowing us to gain a heavenly distance from the struggle, to say, for those in the society, say to the others, oh, how courageous and brave and inspiring those poor unfortunate people are. And with this distance gained, to dismiss the entire melodrama as having nothing to do with one's real life. He's describing privilege here, right? Thus, Deardorff says, having successfully unloaded a whole complex of unconscious fears onto the convenient and nobly suffering other, one feels buoyant, lighthearted, and free. Ironically, a sophisticated dismissal of such sentimentality can have the same distancing result. The actual suffering subject is obliterated. Yet the betrayed and conflicted condition is ultimately the condition of everyone. And I want to welcome people who arrived. Kate Sullivan from the Hudson Valley, wonderful to have you here. And anyone else who's tuning in, live or later. So we have just moved through this set of ideas, looking at privilege. One can feel buoyant, lighthearted, free to be separated, distanced from the other, whether one puts down the other or elevates them in some kind of sentimentality. The actual suffering subject, the one who is othered, is obliterated, is not seen, or worse. Yet, Deardorff tells us, the betrayed and conflicted condition is ultimately the condition of everyone. The liminoid mass man is unable or refuses to make sacred the missing parts, and is henceforth compelled to hide the fault, even from him or herself. Hiding the defect is, in a manner of speaking, to hide one's limp. What happens when people hide their limp? Robert Bly answers clearly, somebody has to limp it. In other words, we assign our defect to an other. So it will not do to simply go out with goodwill, helping and admiring those who limp on our behalf, the starving children, the homeless, the severe behavior youth at risk. We have to show our own defect first. Not only show it, but live it and express it, perform it in a dance. Quoting from Robert Bly from a poem about this limping. Doing what you want Is that like limping? In bird masks with pig noses dancing, teeth like a dog's, sometimes dancing on one bad leg. They do what they want. The dog's teeth say that. Deardorff again. The limp is weird, W-Y-R-D. And showing the limp means that one sets aside the desperate wish for approval, and that somehow one has managed to tap into the authentic or natural desire. In other words, doing what you want and dancing on one bad leg are dependent on each other. The wound's desire cries for healing, wholeness, the promised life. And desire's wound deforms us and makes us weird, revealing our style, dance, vision, genius, marked by the wound and wounded for bearing the mark. You cannot do what you want without showing the limp. So I'm going to just say a couple more things about the trickster here. In the end, we find that trickster wisdom begins in the split consciousness or disequilibrium of being outsider and insider at the same time. Trickster's ambivalence nurtures the adoptive ability to hold our contradictions in the widest constellation of identity and the performance of that identity through the lyre of the leaping consciousness, again, L-Y-R-E, the little harp, which allows us to survive the tragic comedy of civilized life. And so it is up to each of us to recognize the fact that the victories of the excluded are won on our behalf, that those precious wisdoms eked out in suffering and ignominy are gifts to the good of all. While at the same time we must know what occurs, that the societal powers which shock us into such wisdom also strip us of community, of freedom, and dignity. They are evil and must be resisted. Trickster wisdom grows by defeat. Our greatest enemies will be our greatest teachers. The vision of doom is stolen knowledge, illicit contraband. As much as we witness and attest the separate and incompatible experiences of insider and outsider, we are each of us both. And to believe we are one or the other is simple ignorance. I'm going to read that again to get even clearer. The vision of doom is stolen knowledge, illicit contraband. As much as we witness and attest the separate and incompatible experiences of insider and outsider, we are each of us both, even though we are maybe refusing to admit that. And to believe we are one or the other only is simple ignorance. In the paradox of the leaping consciousness, we must learn to be grateful for that which we must ardently oppose. At this crossroads, the initiand finds Baba Yaga's question, did you come here by compulsion or by your own free will? If one answers one-sidedly with the arrogant New Age, my life is perfect, everything is as I ordained it to be, then one must deny the truth that there are powers beyond human control. And if one answers again one-sidedly with the victim abdicators voice, my life has been ruined by forces and enemies that leave me no choice and no option, then one denies the equal truth that each of us is responsible for our acts and our lives. I'll just close here, the last paragraph. The radical task of the other within is to gain that no single position, the impossible locus of Shiva's dance, the thunderbolt destruction and creation of the universe, the poetic task to throw down and restore. And as Rilke says of this task, it is not desiring, not wanting anything that can ever be achieved. I'll say that again because it's so twisty for us to follow, right? Not desiring, not wanting not desiring, not wanting anything that can ever be achieved. Providential nature and the paraclete or wounded healer itself cannot reach us until we accept and commit to the impossible, reaching beyond the categorically possible. Otherwise, it will simply be the same old worn out song and dance. As Lao Tzu said, all greatness is improbable. What's probable is tedious and petty. Impossibly, Deardorff writes, in the wound, where two roads intersect inside us, in the soul gap where we are split, where we are broken, where something is missing. On the blood-soaked earth of this dilemma, the initiand must make a little dancing ground, a woodland hut, a crucible, a cradle of sacred space, a refuge from unbelief, a final place to stand firm against the tides. It's such a beautiful passage. I'll read it one more time. Impossibly, in the wound, where two roads intersect inside us, in the soul gap where we are split, where we are broken, where something is missing, on the blood-soaked earth of this dilemma, the initiand must make a little dancing ground, a woodland hut, a crucible, a cradle of sacred space, a refuge from unbelief, a final place to stand firm against the tides. I've been reading from the third edition of The Other Within, The Genius of Deformity in Myth, Culture, and Psyche by Daniel Deardorff. This is the third edition expanded with new commentaries by mythologist and author and teacher Martin Shaw, and teacher and purveyor of beautiful gemstones and teacher of the healing arts of stones and minerals, Robert Simmons. And Robert Bly wrote the introduction, and this is an edition now released today by Inner Traditions. You can go and get the book there directly from them at innertraditions.com or from your favorite bookseller. And we hope that you'll join us for an official launch event, party, longer readings, more stories, more riffs with myself, Judith Kate Friedman, and Juanita Roberson, who's the author of The Innerground Railroad. And we will be talking about subjects like initiatory journeys and how the arts heal and what it means to become a grown-up in society. What is the medicine that is needed in this time? How can the gift of story and the myth that carries such ancient wisdom from 10,000 years of oral tradition, how can this be relevant? How is it relevant to us at this time? And as we tell some stories and show video and also play some audio of Daniel sharing his own teaching and his storytelling and fire making around the hearth in Zoom land, we will also feed the story and have much more interactivity than we could have today, where we have the ability to see each other and share our interactive ways we're moved by what we hear and see and really taste as the stories are being told. So we want to open up the chat right now for a few minutes in case you have any questions, comments. If you haven't yet said where you're beaming in from, we'd love to know. And I'll just wait here for a second. And while doing so, say that you can find more information about the event in the links that are in the chat, and also go to our website, mythsingerlegacy.org, to learn more about Daniel Deardorff, myth singer, writer, author, myth teller, songwriter, carrier of ritual, great teacher, beloved friend to many, and including the living world and the human world, and my own beloved, who I was privileged to be with for more than 13 years as partners. So I'm not seeing anything else pop up in the chat. If there's no questions, we're going to bid everyone a good night And as the polls are closing, just pray that whatever the outcomes are, we have the wisdom and the space to be able to hold that and never lose track of our kindness, centeredness, value of being here alive on the earth, no matter how whole or broken we may see ourselves or others at a given moment. And that the other within all of us be nourished in every way that we possibly can find. Thanks for being here. See you soon again. Take good care.